Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tips, tools, and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Welcome back, everyone. Today I have guest Troy Hadeed. Troy is an international yoga instructor, public speaker, author, entrepreneur, and host of the Troy Hadeed YouTube channel. He has walked coast to coast across Central America, navigated the world on a ship, and has spent prolonged periods in silence, searching for a deeper understanding to this human experience. Troy hopes that his life will inspire others to embody more compassion, understanding, and love in their lives. Welcome, Troy. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you and we're going to dive into the relationship between the breath and the mind. And so, Troy, we as humans, we focus on a lot of things in our lives. We focus on food, money, water, our jobs, our families, and there are plenty of things that we focus our attention on. But one thing that many of us don't even think about is our breath. And our intention today is to bring the audience's attention and focus to their breath. And we're going to talk about how to do that. So, Troy, how does the breath work and why is it so important to this human experience?
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to say is just to ride on what you just mentioned, Tonya, is, you know, we focus on all these other things, right? But get this, you can survive for 6 days, maybe longer without water. You could survive 2 weeks, maybe 30 days, maybe without food. You can't survive more than 4 minutes without breathing. And we breathe on average 23,000 times a day.
Wow.
So what do you think has more of an impact on who we are and how we live our lives? Our breath. Mm-hmm. Our breath it's so fundamental to who we are and how we show up in the world that if we aren't breathing properly, we're not living properly. And we may say, you know, well, I've been breathing for 3 decades, 4 decades, some about 7 decades. I know how to breathe. Who is this guy? Sure, you come out your mother's womb and breath comes into us. But to be in relationship to breath and to breathe intentionally is very different. Much like you could sit on a couch and eat potato chips for the rest of your life and you'll be living, but are you living intentionally? You know, what is your relationship to it? And I think bringing a relationship to our breath is an absolute life changer.
It is. And, you know, we have that, there is that relationship there. Obviously, our brain is telling us when to breathe and, you know, when not to, but fostering and nurturing that relationship. And so, Troy, what are some factors that actually affect our breathing?
Well, before we even go there, what I would love to do is look at the how of breathing.
Yeah.
Because, you know, very often people think, well, I know how to breathe. What do you mean? How do we breathe? Yeah. How do you breathe? And I would ask a simple question like, when you inhale, do you pull air into your body? Is that a pull of air or a push of air?
I guess I push out of my stomach and pull it. I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, it's actually a trick. It's a trick question. So not knowing it's a good answer. But most people
Troy, I don't know.
most people would say, well, when I inhale, I pull air into my body. Sure, it's not a wrong answer. But the question is, do we understand how we pull air into our body? So this is how breath works. Imagine that, first of all, it's important to note, you know, very often we hear about people talking about breathing into the belly. Breathe into your belly, breathe into your belly. Well, we can't actually breathe into your belly. That's not possible. The only reason that the abdominal cavity expands is because your abdominal cavity, which is like from your rib cage to your waistline, the only reason it expands when we breathe is because the diaphragm descends into the abdominal cavity. And that causes it to bulge, to give us a perception that the belly is expanding. So the belly region may be expanding, but we don't breathe into our belly.
Yeah,
We
because we'd have a
breathe
lot of
in,
gas if we breathed into our belly, right?
yeah,
A lot of air in
yeah.
there.
We breathe into our diaphragm partially, and our diaphragm moves into our abdominal cavity. That's the first thing we have to understand. Where we breathe is our thoracic cavity. That is the region from our diaphragm, just below our rib cage, right up to our sternum and our chest. Good? Now, a lot of the time I would ask someone, well, where do you breathe? And they might say, well, their belly or their chest. But what about everything else? What about your rib cage? What about your back body? Right? So this is what I want to get at. Here's how breath works. Think of your thoracic cavity like a box. And for the listeners that don't have a visual, thoracic cavity, bottom of it is just below your rib cage. It comes up the sides of your rib cage and then across just under your clavicle, if you like, right? Up by your chest. Think of that as a box. And inside this box, I have a set air pressure. When I expand the volume of that box, the air pressure inside of me decreases. Right? That's a law of physics. Volume and air pressure are inversely related. If volume increases, air pressure decreases. Right?
Yeah.
So when I increase the volume of my thoracic cavity, the air pressure inside of me decreases. What that means is that the air pressure outside of me is now higher than the air pressure inside of me. And that brings law of physics number 2. Gases move from high pressure to low pressure. So when that happens, the air outside of me moves inside of me to create balance and equilibrium, right?
Yeah.
So think of it this way. We don't actually pull air into our body. We create space to receive breath.
Oh.
We don't actually breathe, but we are breathed by an external force. All we have to do is create space to be breathed.
Oh, wow. That's powerful.
So, yeah, so back to the thoracic cavity, somebody could ask, well, how do I create space? Well, sure, your diaphragm descends into your abdominal cavity and your sternum may lift. But that's only one dimension. That's only up and down. Your ribcage should expand like gills of a fish. Your back body should expand. So you can create space in every possible dimension. More space you create, it's the more breath you can receive. You know, there's an amazing teacher called Leslie Kaminoff, a yoga teacher, and he describes breath as shape change. The more space you can create, the more you can change the shape of your body, the more you can breathe.
That's really neat. And, you know, Troy, many years ago, I worked in the field of organ donation and transplantation, and oftentimes I would assist in the operating room and we would recover lungs. And they were probably my most fascinating organ to see, because when we'd recover them, we'd have to add air, you know, put air into them. And the size of them, I had no idea how large they were, you know, inside of our body. And you're thinking, wow, those lungs fully full of air can actually fit inside of that body cavity. So when you're talking about space, our body is fascinating at how it can be flexible and it can adapt to things. And so as you're speaking, I'm just having this visualization of those lungs and how, they, you know, with no air, how small they were, and then full of air, how large they were. It just was amazing.
Yeah. And, you know, a reason I wanted to cover that first is because it's important that listeners understand, like you asked me a question, what are things that sometimes inhibit our ability to breathe, prevent us from breathing properly? And it's so important, first off, to understand how breath actually works. Because when we understand that our ability to breathe is directly connected to our ability to create space in our body, then anything that limits our ability to create space limits our ability to breathe.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah, it creates restriction.
Yeah, of course. And that includes things like that people would not even think of: tight muscles. If your muscles of your body are tight, whether they be your hamstrings or your calves or your back muscles or your muscles at the side of your body, like there's so many times that people, even athletes, would come to me and say, my muscles are tight. I don't want to get injured. I'm like, your muscles are tight. You're not breathing properly and you're probably emotionally reactive, because that's how powerful breath is. But it's important for us to understand that anything that restricts our ability to create space is going to limit our ability to breathe. That includes tight muscles in any part of your body because they are all connected.
Mm-hmm.
And that also includes stress, because when we're under a state of mental, emotional stress, the body contracts, right? The body gets small, it gets tight, the breath gets fast. And so those two things are two things that I love to point at, is that tight muscles and stress are two things that really inhibit our ability to breathe.
And those two are very strongly linked together, because when you're stressed, you have tight muscles. And when you have tight muscles, you're stressed. So it's like this, kind of weaving, so to speak, between the two. And so I know, when I worked in a very highly stressful environment in healthcare many years ago, and I did a lot of shallow breathing, like just very short breaths. And I would notice I was exhausted. I was fatigued. And then when I started to learn, I started a very in-depth yoga practice and then meditation. And I learned how to breathe and to take those deep breaths to create space. And I started to apply that to my daily life. And wow, my emotions started to go down. I wasn't spouting off, like I was used to. I wasn't as stressed. I could find myself being more consciously aware of the times when I was shallow breathing and then bringing myself back to my breath. So, stress, I think, is a huge one. And everybody goes through stress, right?
Yeah, of course. And like you pointed out, Tonya, I always say that, especially in the West, we've been fed this narrative of the physical body, the emotional, mental body, the spiritual body as three separate things. And they aren't. And it's important that we recognize it's not that they can communicate with one another. They don't have that choice. They have no choice but to impact one another directly. It's not a choice of they can or they can't. They have no choice. It's not in question. Whatever happens on a physical level impacts your mental, emotional state, and vice versa.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
So let's talk about that, Troy. Let's talk about that relationship between the breath and the mind. What does that look like?
Yeah, there's a great yoga teacher. His name was BKS Iyengar. No longer in his body, but one of his favorite teachings I always repeat is, he said, the mind is king of everything, meaning that your mind dictates your entire human experience. It dictates your perception of any moment, of any individual, of anything you are experiencing. Your mind dictates everything. Your mind decides what is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is false. But breath is king of your mind. And one thing that can train your mind or deepen your relationship to your mind is your breath. And it is I always describe the breath and the mind as if we were in an eternal marriage. This is like a eternal marriage with no separation and no divorce. So it's you and your mind, you and your breath for the rest of your life, rest of your existence, right? And it would serve us, I think anybody who's been in a relationship could acknowledge that for it to be a loving, wholesome, compassionate, nurturing relationship, we have to spend quality time. There must be intimacy, right? There must be that intimacy, that quality time. And to me, this is what practices like meditation teach us. Meditation or yoga, that is just our intimacy with our minds. That is our quality time with our breath and our mind, you know?
Yeah. So that's the benefit of nurturing that relationship. And so, what are some other benefits of, learning how to kind of foster or nurture that relationship between the breath and the mind?
Yeah. Well, could you repeat the question again, Tanya?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, what are you, when you start to work with the mind and the breath, they start to have that beautiful marriage. What are some benefits that people can experience or see from that marriage, the mind and the breath?
So you see, if you don't have that relationship, I often describe the mind, like if you don't spend time with the mind and start nurturing that relationship or the breath, imagine like you were in a relationship with a partner, but you neglected them, or with a child, you neglected them. If you neglect the mind, it becomes overactive, it becomes anxious, it becomes overly stressed. So it has to scream and shout to get our attention. So when you start to cultivate a relationship with the mind, it no longer needs to scream and shout to get our attention. I'm not saying you're not going to experience anxiety, you're not going to experience stress or depression. Of course you will. But when you do, you're now in relationship to it. You can see it, you can understand it, and you can move through it, right? Now, the breath to me is so important because we talked about, you pointed to almost the interconnectivity of the emotions and the physical body and the breath.
Yes.
It's almost like a complete intertwining, right? And when we experience stress of any kind, be it physical stress, mental, emotional stress, any kind of stress, even when the breath starts getting really fast and out of control, we can bring our body and our system back into balance in several ways. You can start with the breath, and you'll find that your mental, emotional state comes back into balance. You'll find that your physical body begins to relax. Mm-hmm. Or if you're in a stress state and you find that you're breathing rapidly and you feel really stressed and anxious, you could turn off your lights, lie down on the floor, and give your physical body time to relax. Give your physical body an opportunity to relax. Because when that happens, it's going to allow your breath back into you, which is then going to change your mental emotional state, impact your mental emotional state. So there's so many different ways, and then you can take it from a mental emotional standpoint. You can, when you feel like you're under stress or under anxiety, you can take a moment and just look at your thoughts, acknowledge your thoughts, acknowledge your fear, and then take a breath, and then bring your body back into balance from that avenue. So there's so many different ways, but what these relationships do is that we cannot control external factors, at least not all the time. We cannot control what people say and what people do and what happens to us. But what we can control is how we respond to external stimulus. And having a relationship with the mind and the breath, Viktor Frank, I think, he says that it gives us back your freedom to respond consciously to life. Because if you don't have that freedom, that moment in which you choose consciously how to respond, then you are really just being manipulated by your emotions and your habitual patterns and your conditioning.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you know, especially with that stress and anxiety, it keeps you in that fight, flight, or freeze response. And when you can learn how to build that relationship between the mind and the breath, it will pull you out of that. It will get you
Yeah.
to a point where you can pull yourself into the present moment, realize that you're safe, right? Because oftentimes
Yeah.
the mind's gonna immediately go to, this is unsafe, and then the breath starts to pick up, right? And you're like, no. I like how you said the breath is the king of the mind. I liked that, because
Yeah.
the mind can be going any which direction, but the breath has the power to shift that, right? To
Yeah.
change the mind and the
The
thoughts.
breath speaks the language of the mind. It's almost like the breath has the mind on a leash. And anytime your mind runs away, breath can bring it back just for a moment, bring it back. And if we keep bringing it back, then eventually mind decides to stay.
That's really neat. So, Troy, can you teach us a simple breath work technique to bring us more into the present moment? Say we're in the middle of a fear state or a panic attack or anxiety. What is a simple technique that we can learn today to help bring us back into that present moment?
All right. There's two I would love to share with you. There's a few really, but the most basic of all is in yoga practice, we call it Ujjayi breathing. And it's breathing through your nose. I think Iyengar also said nose is for breathing, mouth is for eating. Breathe through your nose as much as you can. And it's long, smooth breathing through your nose. But you almost imagine that you're breathing out of your mouth. So imagine that you were blowing out a candle or sucking through a straw, but your mouth is closed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
So
it's
it's the visual
smooth.
in my mind of doing that, but I'm got my mouth closed and I'm breathing in and out of my nose.
Right. So
Okay.
what you'll feel is that you could almost feel the breath vibrate on the back of the throat.
I can. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And it's, that's a resonance. And it's said that this also stimulates the vagus nerve.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And it creates these feelings of upliftment, these feelings of joy, this lightness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I would invite someone to do is just, first of all, get really tall. Sit up really tall. And it doesn't mean you have to cross your legs and look like
A
like a
genie.
yogi from hundreds of years ago. One of the most important things when we sit to breathe is to make sure your hips are higher than your knees. And that means even if we have to sit on a chair, elevate your hips above your knees, and that creates space in your lower lumbar and your lower spine. So you can actually sit up tall without too much effort. And then we would close our eyes and we would just look at the breath. Anytime we sit to breathe, the first thing I invite people to do is just look at the breath. It's like an intimate relationship, right? So if you were in relationship to your partner, the first thing you want to do is just be with them. Listen, just be with the breath. And then as you sit with the breath, you see, well, where breath is moving. Is it breath in the belly? Is it breath in the rib cage? Is it breath in the chest? Does your breath feel shallow? Does your breath feel deep? Does your breath feel forced? Or is your breath at a comfortable state of rest? And then I would slowly invite someone to begin to extend the breath consciously. 3-4 seconds on your inhale, and then there's a subtle pause, and then 3-4 seconds on the exhale, and then there's a subtle pause, and then you would repeat that for about as long as they like, really, as long as time allows them. But even doing a few cycles of that can impact someone's mental emotional state. 3-4 second inhale, slight pause, 3-4 second exhale, slight pause. It's important to note that the pause is not an aggressive retention. It's not like I'm holding breath as long as I can. We don't want to bring aggression to a relationship. We want to be at peace with it. So imagine that pause in yoga, we call it kumbhaka. Imagine that state of kumbhaka is that state where you and your breath become one, where there's that absolute union, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And
Yeah.
that reminds me of a technique called box breathing. I don't know what they call it. And it's very similar. It's that just really focusing on, the breath in, the pause, and then the breath out and the pause. Yeah.
Yeah. So for box breathing, just for listeners and viewers, box breathing would be the same kind of thing, except your retention would be as long as your inhale and your exhale. So you would inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds. And then you might even take a break in between every cycle, or you can just keep going like box breathing, But I think when it comes to breathing and breath work, I always like to say it's important not to build tension and create more aggression. I mean, if you're working with a breathwork teacher and they are guiding you to do that, that's one thing. But on our own, it's not a competition. It's not like how long can we hold, how fast can we go. This is a relationship, right? This is a loving, nurturing relationship. And every breath carries an emotion. And what emotion are we cultivating within ourselves?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. I just feel better just doing that little breathing right there that we did.
Yeah.
And, Troy, this has been a really fun topic today and I can't believe time has just flown right by. And so tell us a little bit about the services that you provide. So if people resonate and they want to reach out, how can they connect with you?
They can find me at troyhadeed.com. And I'm also quite active on Instagram. And then I do at our studio from Trinidad Yoga Studio, we do have a live online platform called Beyond Yoga TV. And I do work with people one-on-one. So if anybody does want breath coaching or yoga private online as well, they're also welcome to fly to Trinidad anytime they want.
I'm all about that. That sounds fun.
Yeah. But but they can reach out to me via Instagram or on my website, troyhadeed.com.
That's great. Well, thank you, Troy. I really appreciate the energy that you brought to the show today. I feel very relaxed, and I'm sending that energy out to the listeners and the watchers as well, that they will feel relaxed too. And if anything, they took a few tools and techniques with them today to help them nurture and foster that relationship between their breath and their mind. So thank you for coming on the show today, Troy. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tonya. Okay.
You deserve to navigate your life in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.theexistentialempath.com.